Lesson 5.4, Factor and Solve Polynomial Equations, Essential Questions and Review. You can read the 4 essential questions for this lesson. How do you factor a trinomial when the leading coefficient is 1? How do you factor a trinomial when the leading coefficient is not 1? What is the first step in factoring any polynomial? And what is a perfect cube? If you notice, we've talked about some of these things before in Chapter 4, studying quadratics. We are now going to apply the knowledge that we learned in quadratics factoring to any higher order polynomial. The first thing we need to do, though, is review what we learned back in Chapter 4. So looking at the first one, x squared minus 3x minus 18. The first thing I notice about this expression is that it is a trinomial, and it is a degree of 2. Because it's a trinomial, I have 2 options. I can do the easy method that we talked about, or we might have to guess and check. In this case, the easy method applies because my leading coefficient is 1. So I simply have to come up with 2 numbers that multiply to give me negative 18, add to give me negative 3. When you think about that, your answer should be negative 6 and positive 3. So x minus 6, x plus 3. Again, that is the easy method that we talked about. The difference between number 1 and number 2, again, number 2 is a trinomial. It is also a quadratic, so we did learn how to factor this. However, my leading coefficient is not 1, which means I have to guess and check. The guess and check method, I list my factors of the first term, which in this case are 1 and 2. My factors of the second term are 1 and 20, 2 and 10, and 4 and 5. When I set up my parentheses this time, okay, I have to put factors of my first term in the first 2 spots, factors of my last term in the second 2 spots. When I do this, we talked about the 2 numbers that are closest together. It's not always 100% accurate, but let's start with those. So let's try 4 and 5. I notice that my back sign is negative, which means one number has to be negative and one number has to be positive in order for me to get that subtraction sign in the back. All I have to do when I guess and check is check my outer plus my inner. So if I go ahead and check my outer, that gives me negative 10x. My inner gives me positive 4x. They have to combine to give me my middle term of negative 3. In this case, it does not work. So what we have to do is go back and change our answer. So now let's try (2x) and x. Let's switch the 4 and the 5 and see if that works this time. Again, I need 1 subtraction and 1 addition sign. When I check my outer, it gives me negative 8x. My inner plus 5x. This one actually does work to give me that middle term of negative 3x. I know I'm going to get negative 20 in the back. That's why I picked 5 and negative 4. I know I'm going to get 2x squared as the first term in my trinomial. That's why I picked 2x and x. So really the only thing I had to check was my outer plus my inner. Here is my solution. Moving right along to number 3, again with number 3, I notice that my leading coefficient is 1 on the trinomial, so I can think of 2 numbers that multiply to give me 16, add to give me 8, positive 4, and positive 4. No need to guess and check on that one. Number 4, there's only 2 terms. And with 2 terms, we talked about patterns. The only pattern we talked about in Chapter 4 was the difference of 2 squares. So far I'm good because it's a difference. It's a subtraction sign in there. I also noticed that 9x squared is a perfect square and 1 is a perfect square. So that pattern tells me I can take the square root of the first term plus the square root of the second term and the square root of the first term minus the square root of the second term. That's my final answer. Last one, number 5. I look at that and I think, what the heck? That's not a pattern. It's a binomial, But what I do notice is that there is a common monomial factor that I can pull out, and that is always my first step in factoring, which is your answer there to essential question number 3. Always look to see what can I factor out first. It didn't help us with 1, 2, 3, or 4 because there was no common monomial factor. But in number 5, there's nothing left for me to do, although I do notice I can factor out 4x from both terms. That'll leave me with 2x plus 5 inside parentheses. In some cases, when you pull out the common monomial factor, you can continue forward with what's left inside the parentheses. In this case, I cannot. There's nothing I can do to 2x plus 5, which means my overall answer here is 4x times the quantity, 2x plus 5.